Hello, everyone. I'm Len Vermillion, Editorial Director with Heart Energy, and I'm very honored to have Daniel Yergin, Vice Chairman of IHS Markit, and of course, Pulitzer Prize winning author and noted energy expert. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and very glad to be with you today.
Right, and I never want to presume anything, of course, but my hunch is that many of the people watching us right now already they know you, probably have read the prize already. The prize, well, that's the old one, but they've read the prize. Hopefully they'll read the new one. Watched you interview several people at CERAWeek over time, and I'm sure a lot of them go through IHS Markit's valuable insights. So there is a new book, as I mentioned, the new map, which you can see behind you, but I have a copy too.
Right.
And I've been reading it, just got done reading it. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion about the book and the industry as a whole. So let's get right into it. So why was it time to write a new book on the energy landscape at this point?
The reason is because so much had changed, beginning with something that you all at Heart Energy know very well, is the shale revolution, the US going from importing 60% of its oil to being basically energy independent, the world's largest producer. So there was that was happening, but also the Paris Climate Agreement and in 2015, and which is really having an effect in 2020, and the falling cost of renewables, the rise of the electric car, which 10 years ago was an artifact of Thomas Edison. And then I would also say the kind of growing geopolitical tension between the United States and China, which I think is profoundly important for world order, and it's also actually important for the energy business.
And of course, in the book, you talk about examining the differences of the various maps of the energy landscape, particularly for different countries and regions, the big four, the Americas, Russia, Middle East, China. Do you see the energy transition playing out differently in all of those, or similar?
Certainly, you do mention it. It was interesting because I mean map in a literal way because the maps are really important. One of the things that just got me to think about this was seeing the change in the trade flows of U.S. oil and gas in exporting rather than importing. The map of trade and pipelines and everything. But it was also a metaphor for the change in the world that was happening and this new terrain that I'm talking about. And I think energy transition, which is, as you know, has become such it's everywhere, as every discussion seems to be about it, means different things to different countries, and different countries are positioned differently for it. And by the way, there's a lot of disagreement as to what it actually means and how long it's going to take and what it's going to cost.
Yeah, along those lines, even back here in the U.S., because most of our viewers are U.S. based, but how does it hold a different meaning for different sectors within here versus independent shale versus majors? Or, could there be different roads taken, or can everybody get together and be one, do you think?
I think there will be different roads. I think there are objectives out there that we would call very ambitious, but the U.S. gets 80% of its energy from fossil fuels. This is a big economy and a lot of infrastructure, and the average car stays on the road for 12 years. And getting to scale is going to be a challenge. So different people see it differently. The role of carbon capture is important. I think natural gas and oil are still going to be big parts of the energy picture down the road. So that's why one reason carbon capture is significant. But different attitude in the Northeast. Massachusetts won't allow, New York State won't allow a natural gas pipeline to pass through it. So Massachusetts imports liquefied natural gas. Different attitudes from that in Texas. So I think, and then renewable industry sees things one way, but others see you need natural gas to balance out wind and solar. So a lot of different perspectives. But of course, with the Biden administration and a $2 trillion climate plan, it will be stepping, if I may use this metaphor, if it's not inappropriate, we'll be stepping on the gas on renewables.
You know, you brought up a couple things. Actually, two questions I want to follow up with on there. First, you know, can they all, let's add alternative energy into that mix. Can they all work together on this road ahead? I mean, throw in renewable energy. I mean, we hear so much about different sectors, and one has to be a winner, one has to be a loser. Does there have to be winners and losers here?
So I'll tell you, the conclusion that I come to in the new map is we're going to have a mixed energy system. Right now, we see electric utilities in the country pretty committed to renewables and moving 2035 to 2050 to this net zero carbon. And they can get partway there, but you really need natural gas to balance out the intermittency of renewables until such time as you have big batteries that can really store, you know, electricity for long periods of time. So they do have to work together. So I think there are the ambitions and the numbers that are thrown out there, and then there are realities of keeping our economy going and keeping it working. And so I have a line in the new map. I said some people aren't going to like hearing this, but oil is going to be around for a long time. And I think we see at IHS Markit the LNG is going to, you know, grow substantially, like 3% a year for the next 20 years.
You know, and I think that that's a fear that a lot of oil and gas producers had was, were they going to be able to be part of this conversation? And what do you think they need to do to ensure that they are going forward?
I think it's going to be a challenge in a Biden administration, because you have sort of two wings. You have a shall we say, totally climate focused, who may not, you know, have a very good grasp of the overall numbers in the economy and how it works, but who are very vociferous and feel that that Biden owes his victory to them. And then there are people who are more centrist, who, you know, have a greater sense, I think, of the technology and how the different parts of the energy economy and the overall economy fit together and work, and who also say that Biden owes his victory to his ability to appeal to the rest of the country, not just to one segment of the Democratic Party. And I think that's going to be the tug of war, or the battle within the Biden administration is coming. I think there's a reality here that this is an industry that before the virus had 12.5 million people. It's a big contributor to the improvement in the balance of payments, over $200 billion in new investment in factories. Very important for manufacturing industry in the United States, big source of revenue, big contributor to energy security, and a big contributor to a better position for the US in terms of foreign policy. So I think all of those are factors that will need to be weighed in the balance if we are going to see a battle within the Biden administration. Of course, things will depend upon the Senate as well. But I think it's important that the full story of this sector's role in the overall economy needs to be told, and that needs to be on the table when decisions are made, and it can't just be waved away.
We talked about the Biden administration. Obviously, the other big story among many in this eventful year is the oil price crash back in the spring. What is that relationship with American shale and OPEC Plus now and going forward as we go through this energy transition and this new map?
I think when shale first appeared, it was dismissed as a bubble, as something that would go away. I think it's now recognized that shale is going to be one of the cornerstones of the global oil industry going forward. It's not going to grow at 2 million barrels a day or 1.5 million barrels a day, but I think that at the end of the year we'll probably be down 2 million barrels a day or more than we were in February of 2020. But I think that kind of when we see the vaccine and it gets widely deployed and economies start growing, we'll see, and maybe the middle of next year, we'll start to see shale start to grow again, or the third quarter. But the change, it's a geopolitical change. For decades and decades, it was OPEC versus non-OPEC. Then it became OPEC plus, but now it's really the big three. It's the United States, it's Russia and China. I'm sorry, that's on the consumption side. On the production side, it's of course the United States, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. We'll come back to China in a little bit, but and we saw the big three at work when, in the spring, when the oil price not only collapsed, it went negative. It was the U.S. that stepped in, and with some senators taking some strong stands in the Trump administration, and negotiated a deal when Russia and Saudi Arabia were in a price war. And afterwards, the Saudi petroleum minister said, well, at least we now don't need to go to the divorce lawyers, and that's stabilization. So instead of negative prices, we've been in this thing that I've started calling the virus alley of oil prices in sort of high 30s to high 40s, which I think we're going to be boxed in a virus alley until there's greater confidence about the virus and about vaccines.
So, speaking on the virus, and you brought up China, obviously that's a big demand center and so forth. So where do you see demand going? And do you have any,
Yeah, I do.
I
I definitely have views on demand that's just different from what's out there, this kind of pessimism. I think things are changed. People are going to, commuting will be changed, how much people work in offices. I mean, you walk to work, as you told me before we started, but a lot of people just stay at home maybe a couple of days a week, but we'll see how that shakes out. And I think every company is sort of struggling with that question about the return to work and how to manage it. But I'll tell you, and of course, with the downturn that's come with the lockdowns in Europe and the increasing illness in the United States, that hits demand. But the other side are two factors that I think are really important. One is named China and one is named India. And in September, my colleagues at our office in Beijing say that Chinese oil demand was higher in this September than it was a year ago. And we just did our annual India Energy Forum with Prime Minister Modi and several ministers. And, the message there too is that Indian oil demand now is higher in October than it was October before the virus. So I think that there may be some surprises on the demand side once the virus is under control and the vaccine is there. But so much does depend upon the vaccine and or we should say vaccine plural, and their deployment.
Right, and in your book, I think you talked about the developing world and demand and so forth. So how's that, I guess India and China, we're talking demand. I don't, they'd be developed for the most part. But what about African and demand or any other areas that?
Well, there's concern about how hard hit the continent of Africa is going to be long-term by this. But what I do find in emerging markets, developing world, a different attitude towards those two words, energy transition, than you hear in North America, US and Canada, and you hear in Western Europe, because they have lots of poor people. And for them, the biggest environmental problem, and this is what the World Health Organization said, is indoor air pollution from people cooking with waste wood, animal waste, crop waste. And you talk about 3 billion people who do that. And so for those countries, it's to, and I have a chapter that focuses on that. What they're saying is we need more commercial energy, we need more natural gas, we need more oil in order to address poverty, in order to address health. And I have a great quote from the Nigerian petroleum minister saying, it's great, if you live in the Netherlands and Germany, you can go in that direction. But we have a lot of people whose income needs to be improved, whose health needs to be improved, and we have to get natural gas to them.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is technology. I know you devoted part of the book to the role of technology in the future. So can you tell me what you think the importance of breakthrough technology will be for this industry going forward?
Well, I think two things. One is, technologies don't happen overnight. I mean, shale took 18 years of the obsession in the view in the face of a lot of skepticism directed to George P. Mitchell. Wind and solar, in my previous book, in The Quest, I went back and said, where did the modern wind and solar industry came from? And they're both from the early 1970s. It took about 40 years until they became commercial. Now they're very commercial and competitive. So we need new technologies. And IHS Markit did a study. We did it with Ernie Moniz, the former energy secretary, for the Gates Foundation and for Breakthrough Energy Coalition. What are the technologies that aren't there? And, we identified a lot of them, and they're not going to come, they're not going to come overnight. But I think in terms of where people, a lot of people want to move on energy transition, you're going to need new technologies, but that's going to take time.
Well, hopefully the service sector can bounce back here, and that would be the next question I would have. What do you think for the service sector going forward?
I think that if you think back to the late 90s when oil prices collapsed, you got the consolidation that led to the super majors to bring down costs and get scale. That's what we're now going to see and are seeing in shale. It's inevitable that it happens. It was the smaller companies that made it happen, and there'll still be small companies, and people will start new small companies. But you'll see a lot of consolidation to manage costs and get to scale. And you won't have that helter-skelter growth of 1.5 million or 2 million barrels a day. So I think for the service industry, it's already gone through a very difficult period. It's really tough. It's really on the people and on the companies. But with a recovery, there will be a recovery in the service industry. But again, too, it will not be on the same scale or the same intensity of activity that we saw. And there'll be more of a focus also on kind of the environmental aspects of it. So you can't have a oil and gas industry without a service industry, right? For sure. And the service industry also needs to come back, and it will come back, but it will not come back at the same scale when it was really boom times. But I do think, and I want to emphasize this, that we will see U.S. oil output, I'm convinced, start to increase again in the second half of next year.
Well, great. One of the things I wanted to point out, I came into covering this industry shortly after the prize came out, and big help to me in learning all about this industry. One of the things we do here a lot is we really like to champion the next generation of oil and gas executives and so forth. So hopefully they'll pick up this book and read it. But what do you think? I mean, do we have how do we get more people involved with the energy industry going forward, especially for younger generations?
Well, I think it is, given all the language that's out there, it is a challenge for it. I spoke to it was an anniversary for the Society of Petroleum Engineers and for kind of its original parent organization. And, one of the people said, well, what do we tell our petroleum engineering students? I think to tell them the oil industry is going to continue to be a substantial industry. It's going to continue to be a global industry. It's had actually a resurgence in the United States. If you went back to 2008, and back then, it was really, there was no future, in the US, it had to be elsewhere. But so I think it will be an industry. It does go through these cycles, and that creates, a lot of pain, but it's going to need new generations of people coming in and seeing the importance of this industry in terms of making the economies continue to work. So I think your focus on next generation of leaders and the next generation, the generation after that, is a very important thing to do and to help them have a longer vision. And so I'm hoping, you write a book, you don't know what impact it will have. It's a kind of lonely process. You're by yourself. And I would remember when I'd write the prize, just sort of wondering what's going to be the impact. Little did I think it would become as integral to the industry that so many people read it and who have read it as have grown up in the industry. And I'm hoping the new map will provide the same sort of guidance to think about how the world is going to continue to develop and the role of this industry as well as other industries in it. And it's just striking, when I wrote the prize, particularly the first edition, the whole question was US oil dependence, how risky would it be? China was not a factor really at all in the book, and certainly not shale. And now in the new map, China is a very important part of the story, as is shale, and renewables, and climate change was not an issue then. And obviously climate change is a pervasive political question today.
And I'll just ask you one final question. And are we at a watershed moment with oil and gas in history at this point?
Yes, in the sense that the energy markets are going to be competitive, and in a way that they were not before. Competitive with wind and solar, competitive with electric car. Although the view I take in the new map is that it's going to take a long time. That in 2050 there'll probably be as many gasoline-powered cars as there are today, but there will also be 600 million electric vehicles at that time. But it is, I think that's a very interesting way to see it, is that it's a much more competitive landscape, and public policy is going to be much more active in it, and companies will adapt to that. And but I think that, if wind and solar took a long time, carbon capture will have to be part of it, because oil and gas are going to be a big part of the energy mix in 2040 and 2050.
Well, again, the book is The New Map, Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations. Daniel Yergin, thank you for being with us, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you, and very glad to have the chance to talk with you and to engage with your audience on these very important questions. So thank you indeed.
Okay. And of course, we look forward to seeing you at the next CERAWeek. So we'll.
Thank you.
Well.
See you at CERAWeek.